Hello YouTube and welcome to part 3 of the random 1911 DIY project, Putting It Back Together. In part 1 of the series, we took a 1911 pistol from a functioning firearm down to a pile of parts. In part 2 of the series, I went over all of the parts from the 1911, how they interact with each other, what their jobs are, and how to identify some potential problem areas. Here in part 3, we're going to be doing a full reassembly of the 1911, as well as going over some function testing methods to make sure that you reassembled it properly. Stay tuned and enjoy. Okay, so now you've stripped your firearm down, cleaned up all the little bits and pieces, wiped it all off, put down a fresh coat of oil, and you're ready to reassemble and get everything back in the right place. Now I've got everything sorted out here. I've got the mainspring housing, its 2 plungers and springs already in place, the small retaining pin for the plungers and springs in the mainspring housing, and the retaining pin for the mainspring housing itself. Over here I have the disconnector, sear, firing pin safety lifter, and sear pin. Here I have the magazine release and its spring and plunger. I have the hammer, the firing pin safety lever and its pin. Here I have the 2 small plungers and spring that work on your thumb safeties and sit in the tube here on the side. Slide release, trigger, all of our slide parts, the extractor, firing pin and its spring, firing pin blocking safety, firing pin blocking safety spring, and backplate. Here I have both parts of the thumb safety. Here's the sear spring, recoil spring and plug, barrel, guide rod, barrel bushing, grip safety, slide, and we have the frame. So let's go ahead and get started. First, we will reassemble the magazine release and the mainspring housing. So let's start off with the magazine release. Just like when we took it apart, if you need to, you can use the sear spring as your screwdriver. So what you'll want to do is you'll want to have the spring on the pin. You're going to want to put the pin in to where the little tab that sticks off of it slips down into this notch. Then you'll gently press in with your screwdriver or whatever you're using until you can turn it counterclockwise so that that tab falls down into this side notch. That's reassembly. Easy. Now for the mainspring housing. This one's a little more difficult. It is much easier if you have a vise. So, first thing we're going to do, part of the reason why it's easier if you have a vise is this is angled down here. Okay, if this is straight up and down, you've got an angle here. So that when you push down, it wants to do this, or it wants to do this. Makes it kind of difficult, but it's still doable. Now, I'm going to set this up so that the inside, which has the larger diameter of the 2 holes, to the left, I apologize, the inside is now going to be to the left so that while I'm holding the spring and plungers compressed, I can just grab that small pin and slip it in without much issue. So, cone-shaped plunger goes in first, down to the bottom. Then your spring will follow after it, and then your big flat plunger with the dimple in it. Then you'll want to take a punch, pin, something, and you need to compress this great long spring down into this much shorter body. Might take a little work. There we go. It just slipped over the bottom plunger. Get that down in there. Get that pin in place. Ease off. Now that small pin is holding the two plungers and the spring down in there. I'm surprised when I did the dry run in this video to make sure that everything was going to show up okay on the camera. This thing was just kicking itself out left, right, and center. I wasn't recording at the time, otherwise I'd put it in at the end for a blooper reel. Yeah, it's not usually that easy, at least for me. Alright, so now we can set that and its retaining pin off to the side. And now we get into the nitty-gritty of putting all the bits and pieces back together. So the first thing we're going to do, take our frame. Now, you might be able to pick it up on the camera, you might not. But you'll see here and here, there are two slots that run all the way down. Those two slots are what the trigger rides in. Now, I mentioned it before when I was talking about the parts. The trigger has a short side and a long side on its bow. Okay, there's an angle over here that's like this. You want that longer side on the bottom. So we'll go ahead, line that up with its slots, and drop it in. Next thing we'll put in is the magazine release. That'll hold our trigger down into place. So from the right side of the gun, slip it in, making sure it all lines up. Then just like when we disassembled it, you got to push it out just a little ways. Maybe 1/8 of an inch. As you start to turn that screw head, you'll kind of feel if you'll get tight and loose areas. You want to go for the loose area so that you can just easily turn that screw to the right clockwise, and it'll eventually snap and keep everything locked into place real nice. So that's it. Next section that we work on is the sear area, which is going to comprise of the disconnector, the sear, the safety lifter, the firing pin safety lifter, and the sear pin. All three of these parts ride on the sear pin itself. So, this is where having what most gunsmiths refer to as slave pins helps. Now, this pin here is just the right size to fit through the sear pin hole in the frame. So, first thing we're going to do is we're going to try and wiggle the lifter into place. Now, that little nose right there needs to be pointing towards the back of the gun. Alright, so if we're looking at the frame like this, this needs to go in this way. You want the small nose pointing towards the back of the gun, and you want the heavy leg sticking down. This part's a little bit tricky, but you need to get it aligned with, you need to get its hole aligned with the sear pin hole. And this is where having a pick with a small end comes in handy, because you can usually reach in from a side somewhere, catch it, and move it around until it's lined up. You know? Well, it's mostly aligned. Also, if you use something like Brownell's Action Lube Plus, which is a heavy grease for use on firearm parts. There we go. Got it on there. So now, it's hard to see in here, but now that little lever is on this slave pin and where it needs to be. But if you're using Action Lube Plus, you can kind of use it to hold the part in place, because it is more of a grease. It's very thick. It's kind of sticky, so you can use that to hold the part in place a little bit. Now comes the disconnector. Now I'm just gonna let that sit there like that. Now comes the disconnector and the sear. Now, I mentioned it before, but the disconnector has a flat side and it has a hooked side. Flat side, kind of a bumpy hooked side. That flat side needs to go against the back of the trigger bow. Make sure that it's actually against the trigger bow and not behind it. Getting it behind it will cause all sorts of problems. It needs to be against the trigger bow. There's also, if you look up in there, you can kind of see up here, there's a hole. That rounded end goes up through that hole. Now, I'm going to have to pull this pin out most of the way. And I just put a little tension on one side to kind of keep it in place so that I can fit this up in there. That's what we'll do now. Get in the hole. There we go. Okay. So it's now up in the hole. Now I'm going to take the sear. Now, you've seen, if you've been watching, you see how the sear is a half moon shape. You want the outside of the curve, meaning this side over here, to go on to the disconnector. Okay? So you want the hook pointing back towards you. That hook is what engages the hammer. Okay, now I kind of got it in place. I got to ease this pin out just a little more, and then I can slip that sear all the way up in place. And now it's a case of doing a little wiggling, doing a little twisting, and you can get your pin to go through all of the holes. Now, what you're going to want to do is take your sear pin. Now you'll feel that on one end of your sear pin there's a little lip there. Okay, really hard to see on camera, and it's very faint. but you want that lip side to be on the left side of the gun. So what I'll do here is I'll take the non-lipped side, the kind of rounded side, put it against my slave pin, and slowly push it through, following the slave pin all the way through the gun until it's flush on this side. Now all of our parts inside are in place for that pin. The next part we'll put in is going to be the safety lever, the hammer, and their pin. Now you put in the safety lever first, and you kind of want to keep some, whether a finger or something over the back of that sear pin that you just put in, so it doesn't just fall out the other side if you're moving things around a lot. Now if you look up here, you'll see there's this cutout that runs down here. You'll see that this has this big hook on it. This hook lies in that cutout. Like so. Get your holes aligned. Then you'll take your hammer and with the strut up, though it doesn't really matter yet at this point, but with the strut up, you just slip that into place. Then you take your hammer pin, which just like with the sear pin has a little shoulder on one side. You want that shouldered side to be against here. So you'll put the rounded end in through first, push it through. Now all of the main guts for your frame are together. Everything's held in place by those two pins. There's no spring tension on anything yet, so make sure you don't just like turn the gun over and have those pins fall out. They typically aren't a very tight fit. Alright, so the next part that we're going to be installing is going to be the sear spring. For the sear spring, what you want to do is you definitely want to have that hammer strut sticking up. And if you look down here at the bottom, you'll see this little slot there. If you look at the bottom of your sear spring, you'll see there's a little hook on the bottom of it. That little hooked end, that little hook tab goes down into that slot. Now when you install this, you can't just put that hooked end into the slot and then try and put it up. The sear leg of the spring will bump up against the frame here. So you actually have to slip the top end in first and then align the bottom end. Now this will be a little difficult to show, but I mentioned it in the other video. The sear leg, which is the leg on this side, the hooked side of it is next to the sear, and the flat side of it is actually resting on the bottom leg of the sear. Okay, that's important. That's what gives your sear spring tension. The next piece that we're going to be putting in is going to be your mainspring housing. Now to do this, you align the rails on the spring on the mainspring housing with the grooves that are in the frame, and you're just going to start to slide it up a little bit. And I say a little bit because if you go too far, then your hammer struts on the outside and that's all sorts of bad. So you want to just slide it up a little bit so that it's in there, but your hammer strut will still fall down in without a problem. Now what I like to do here is I'll get the hammer strut itself into alignment with the plunger in the mainspring housing, and I'll just get it started into that hole. There's a reason for this. If you have one of the more commonly fitted grip safeties, the two tabs that are on the bottom will lock in to the mainspring housing. So you're not going to be able to get after that hammer strut if you leave the mainspring housing way down here, put the grip safety on, and then try and shove everything up. Chances are your hammer strut's going to bind on one of the other surfaces of the mainspring housing. But if you just get it started, you should have enough room to be able to slip this in as well, which is what you would do now if you have a more commonly fitted grip safety. Right, you get it up in there, push the bottom in all the way. You'll have to wiggle it in a little bit. You kind of got to nose dive that nose there. You got to get that started in first, then you'll kind of rock it. Then you'll kind of rock it up and in and bring it down. And you want to keep that bottom side pressed in. If you can keep the whole thing pressed in to alignment, that's great. Then you'll finish pressing your mainspring housing up, and then you can typically let go. Now, as I mentioned in the other video, this grip safety just falls in and out without issue, so I don't have to do that portion of it right now. I also mentioned in the last video that having a grip safety that just falls out when the mainspring housing is out of place makes reassembly a little bit easier. So now you'll see that it's in, but it's not all the way in, the hole's not aligned, yada yada. What I'll do is I'll take the retaining pin, and it has a rounded end and it has the dimpled end. You want the dimpled end on the left side of the gun. So just like when we disassembled it, I'll push down, push that back corner of the mainspring housing down on the table to align the hole, take the pin, get it started in. Hey, it started in. Then I'll take the mallet and finish tapping it. That is now all assembled. I'll slip this one back into place, and this is where the tricky bits come in. Okay, first we have to cock the hammer, or rather, the next thing we're going to put in is going to be the two plungers and spring from this tube. Now you want to put in the smaller of the two plungers, the one that has a little shoulder on it, first. It goes in first, it goes all the way down to the other end. Then you'll put in your spring. Then you'll put in your larger plunger. Kind of give them a press to make sure that they're seated. Now you'll see that the larger plunger is just sticking way out. That'll get corrected as soon as we install the thumb safety. Now, just like when we disassembled it, for this to work, the hammer must be cocked. Okay? And this thumb safety has to go in the half on, half off position. So we'll get the back tab started down, started in back here to hold on to the grip safety. We'll need to make sure that our plunger stays in place. And then once again, like when we disassembled it, you're going to take the point of that hump, line it up with the plunger, and you're going to work this thing down in. Hey, it snapped into place, except for it's still over top of the plunger. The plunger's actually behind the thumb safety at the moment. How do you solve that? You can take a small screwdriver, you can take a small punch, small pin. What you'll do is you'll come up here, and this should stay in relatively the half on, half off position. You're going to put some tension on it. Then you're going to reach in through the top here and shove that plunger down. You're going to put tension on the safety. Oh, I wasn't in the half on, half off position. It shifted on me. There we go. You're going to push the plunger down while pushing in on the safety, and then remove your hand quickly. That just snapped the safety in place. The plunger is now riding on this face of the safety. Now we can install the other side. We've got the safety down. You'll kind of feel it if you get it in there and just kind of roll it around a little bit. You'll find where it lines up with the other side, and then it'll just snap into place. That part's done. Actually, the frame is now done, with the exception of putting your grips back on. So let's go ahead and handle that right now. Okay, frame's done. Now we'll reassemble the slide. First thing that has to go into the slide is going to be your extractor. Now, the back of your extractor is angled and curved and shapely. That matches up with the angle and curve of the back of the slide. So, one, you need to make sure you match up the angles. Two, you always want the hook towards the center of the slide. Alright? Three, there's a slot here. There's a slot right there. That slot lines up with the slots back here at the back of the frame, or at the back of the slide, which is what the back plate rides in. You have to make sure that this slot on the extractor lines up and matches with the slot in the back of the front, slide. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to get your extractor back in, or your back plate back on. Now, this thing is angled, so it's kind of difficult to really pound it in and have everything lined up properly. Now, I just pushed this in most of the way. I'm going to push it in a little bit further because, remember, we only need about 1/8 of an inch of this thing sticking out for us to be able to put our firing pin blocking safety, plunger, and spring back in place. Now, on mine, I've got what visually looks like a small end and a big end. I usually put the small end in first. Of course, it helps if you put the spring itself in first. This is where good light, possibly a pick, pin, or punch, will come in handy. You want to make sure that that spring winds up flush down in the bottom of its hole. Then we'll go ahead and drop the plunger in. Hey, it goes in and out, no problem. That's excellent. Now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to hold that plunger in while I finish tapping the end of the extractor in. Now I'm not holding it bottomed out. I'm not holding that plunger bottomed out. I'm just holding it in a little bit, one, to make sure it doesn't jump out while I'm pounding in the extractor, but also so that I know it, so I can be sure that it's going to get caught by the extractor. See, now that plunger doesn't fall out of the gun. That's always a good thing. Alright, we've tapped the extractor back in. It looks like the slot's lining up properly in the frame. It looks fairly flush. Now we need to push in on that blocking safety, push the firing pin and its spring back in. Push it as far as you can with your finger. Don't just drop and let go of it, but just kind of ease the tension off. Then push in that plunger again and push the firing pin all the way in. Then let go of the plunger and let go of the firing pin. That only works if you have a firing pin blocking safety. If you do not have a firing pin blocking safety, my recommendation to you is this. You get the firing pin in as far as you can and ease the pressure off to where it's just sitting there at rest. Then you take your back plate, get it in position. Okay? Then push in the firing pin the rest of the way with a punch or whatever you're using, and then push or tap the back plate the rest of the way in. Or in until you got no space, you can't go any further because it's bottoming out on the pin. Then remove the pin and finish pushing that back plate down in. The back plate will hold as long as it gets enough coverage over the firing pin. It will hold the firing pin in place so that until you push it the rest of the way in and the firing pin, the head of the firing pin is able to snap out into this hole, this will be what holds it when you can't hold it with a pin or a punch. If you got the Series 80, you can use the firing pin blocking safety to hold the firing pin out of the way while you reinstall your back plate. Now, there's something you should notice about the back plate. It has a curved face out here at the bottom edge of it. One, that curved face goes at the bottom. Two, that curved face faces outside of the gun, so towards the back of the gun, or towards the back of the slot. That's what initially starts pressing on your hammer to push it back. That's the nice curved edge that runs into the hammer and starts pushing it back and down. So make sure that's oriented properly. this one tightened up on me again. So I'm just going to take a little punch, or in this case a pin, tap this down a little bit. Now I'm not tapping on the rounded part, I'm tapping on the shoulders at either side. There we go. Now that's seated all the way up. Now, again, if you've got the firing pin blocking safety, you're going to push in on the firing pin, push down on that plunger, let go of the firing pin, let go of the plunger, and your slide is now reassembled. Reassemble after field strip, get barrel in, get your bushing in, your guide rod, your plug and spring. Now, if you're using the full-length guide rod like I am, you'll see how I do it, and I find it to be the easiest. If you're using the original style guide rod, which is only about this long, as opposed to this long, it's only about this long. If you're using that one, you'll get the guide rod into place, then you'll put the slide with the guide rod onto the frame. Get it locked into place with your slide stop. You know, get your slide stop pinned back through, get everything reattached. Bring your slide all the way forward. Then you'll put in your spring and plug. With the full-length guide rod, such as this one has, what I'll do is, again, put the guide rod in, slide your spring over the guide rod. Now, what I'll do is I'll hold down here at the back, at the bottom of that guide rod with my thumb. I'll then press down as far as it goes, that spring and plug. Then I let go with my thumb and I rotate the bushing till it lines up. Which, even though it doesn't look like it on camera, that is lined up. Then I come back down here and I press on the bottom of that guide rod again. You heard the snap, you saw this pop up, everything's back in position now. Now, camera cocked just because it's easier. Now you're going to run your slide onto your frame. Now, when you're doing this, it's kind of hard to see, but that firing pin safety lever may be sticking up. You need to make sure that it's down. Otherwise, when you try to pull your slide back all the way, it runs into it and jams. That's bad. So you want to make sure that's all the way down. Get your slide all the way back. Wiggle yourself into position so that your slide catch will go in. I like to get mine started over here, and then I'll run the slide back until I find the takedown notch, put it in. Alright. The 1911 is now back together. Now, as I said at the beginning of the video, in the introduction, it's going to show you how to test to make sure that you reassembled everything properly. First test we're going to have is, okay, gun's clear, right? We're going to put on the thumb safety, and we're going to pull the trigger. Gun does not go click. Gun does not go bang. Excellent. All right. Now we're going to turn off the thumb safety, and without pressing in the grip safety, we're going to pull the trigger. Okay? Uh-oh. We got a problem. The hammer is not supposed to fall if that grip safety is not pushed in. This is a problem that I already found with this gun. That nose on the grip safety has worn down enough so that even when this isn't pressed in, there's enough slop between it and the trigger that the sear is able to move, the trigger is able to move enough to move the sear out of the way of the hammer and let the hammer fall. I will be getting a new grip safety in a few weeks. When I get that in, I'll probably do I might do a small fitting video for it, but your hammer should not fall if that is not pressed in. If it does, you need to take your firearm to a gunsmith and have them fit you up a new grip safety. Okay, now remember, this firearm has 3 safeties in it. It's got the thumb safety, it's got the grip safety, and it's got the firing pin blocking safety. How do we test that thing? I mean, you can't see it to make sure that it's going off. Well, the easiest way to do this is to take a pencil, put an eraser end first down the barrel. Now this is just a test to make sure that it's getting out of the way. It is far more involved to try and test to make sure that it's operating properly. Meaning that it's blocking the safety, because that usually entails forcing the hammer off of the sear without moving the trigger. And yeah, we just for today we just want to make sure that the firing pin blocking safety disengages when we pull the trigger. So hammer's cocked, I got my grip safety pulled in, got a pencil down the barrel, eraser end first, thumb safety is off, and now I'm just going to pull the trigger. Excellent. The pencil jumped out of the gun. That means that the firing pin hit the pencil and launched it out of the gun, which means that our firing pin safety is in fact turning off. That is excellent news. It means that we reassembled those parts correctly. The fact that when the hammer is down, the thumb safety doesn't have much movement on it, it won't go up into place, that's good to know. When we have the hammer all the way back and we put the safety on and we pull the trigger, nothing happens. That's good. When we've got the hammer back and the grip safety is not being touched and we pull the trigger, nothing happens. That's good to know. Remember, don't use my gun as an example for that one. Just take my word for it. The safeties of the gun should hopefully be functioning the way that they're supposed to. All of your bits and pieces should be back into place, hopefully the way they're supposed to. I hope that you enjoyed this series. I will, when the weather breaks, eventually be doing a test fire, doing a review and a shooting session with this gun, but it's February and the weather sucks and my only camera is the webcam at the moment. So yeah, not dragging the laptop outside to sit in the snow while I sit here and fire off this thing for the sake of YouTube. If you have any questions, maybe something I forgot to cover throughout this process, go ahead and leave them in the comments. If you like the video, please hit that like button. If you dislike the video, please hit the dislike button. If you'd like to see more or find my channel to be interesting, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Either way, I hope you enjoyed yourselves, and have a great day.